It's time to talk about June's Journey, a hidden object mystery game with a captivating detective story. When you're playing, you solve a mind-teasing mystery of the roaring 1920s while you dive into June's captivating quest to uncover a scandalous family secret and solve her sister's murder. It's mystery, it's danger, and it's romance, and you never know where the next chapter's gonna take you. If that wasn't fun enough, you get to customize your very own luxurious island estate. Seriously, I cannot stop playing. I am already on the 3rd chapter and I just started recently. Join me back in time in the glamorous 1920s. June needs your help, detective. Download June's Journey for free today on iOS and Android.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
For just $2.99 a month, you can help the Murder Diaries podcast more than you already do by being a valued listener. In return, you get to listen ad-free. So head over to patreon.com/The Murder Diaries pod or search The Murder Diaries ad-free on Spotify. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcast. Again, $2.99 and you get to listen ad-free.
Welcome to The Murder Diaries. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Paige.
When you go out shopping, you expect a few things to happen. Maybe you can't find the item you're looking for, or the store's out of your size. The lines might be long, the sales might not be as good as you thought they would be. You don't, however, expect to walk into a store to shop and end up in a mass shooting situation. According to RetailDive.com statistics, shootings in retail settings have risen sharply since the data collection began in 1966. For example, in 2022, there were 37 mass public shootings in retail environments, a number that's more than doubled in the past 15 years. In 2008, one of the 17 mass shootings on record happened in Chicago, in a women's clothing store 30 miles outside of the city.
Used to think it's in my head, but I'm walking with the dead.
Wintertime in Chicago is known to be chilly. But this day, February 2nd, 2008, was a freezing cold day. The wind chill was biting and it was sleeting. In the suburb of Tinley Park, Rhoda McFarlane opened the Lane Bryant store she managed, along with one of her part-time employees. The store was located in an outdoor shopping center. Now, for those unfamiliar with Lane Bryant, it's a women's apparel store that specializes in plus-size clothing and intimates. In fact, it's the largest plus-size retailer in the United States, with over 448 stores in 46 states. Rhoda's store was scheduled to open at 10 a.m., and the women ensured the store was ready to open on time. By 10:08, the only person to enter the store was a delivery driver. He entered the store, and the part-time employee, who happened to be standing by the doors, greeted him. He then walked towards Rhoda, who was by the cash registers with the paperwork in his hands. He asked if he was in the right store while glancing around. And that's when he pulled a .40 caliber Glock pistol and announced he was robbing the store.
He was likely looking around for security cameras, and when he saw there weren't any, he decided to pull the gun.
And that's when Rhoda and the other employee realized that the man standing in front of them wasn't a delivery driver after all. The gunman ordered the women to empty the cash registers, but there wasn't much in them. And it makes sense. The store had just opened and Rhoda had already dropped off the banking. This agitated the gunman, who swore and yelled at the women for being too slow or not doing something the way he wanted. During the course of the robbery, 2 female customers entered the store. They had no idea what they were walking into. At this point, the gunman herded the now 4 women into the back room. At gunpoint, he forced the women to duct tape each other's wrists behind their backs and told them to lay on the floor face down. While this was happening, 2 more women wandered into the store, and they were also forced into the back room where their wrists were bound and they were ordered to lay face down on the floor. During this terrifying ordeal, Rhoda bravely attempted to free herself from the duct tape without being noticed while the gunman was distracted elsewhere in the store. She was successful and managed to get her hands free. She likely knew she didn't have much time. But instead of making a run for it out of the emergency door, she called 911. It's possible that she knew using the emergency door would set off an alarm, and her escape may have angered the killer more, endangering the lives of the 5 other women. Once the call connected to 911, she managed to whisper the store name and location to the operator, pleading with the operator to hurry. The operator asked Rhoda to stay on the line, but the line went dead. Before it clicked off, the killer can be heard in the background saying what sounds like, "I'm losing it." At some stage while holding the women hostage, the killer put underwear over their heads and faces so they couldn't see. The killer then fondled one of the women, before shooting 5 of them in the back of the head. Rhoda was shot as well, but in the forehead. The shootings happened within 2 minutes of Rhoda's heroic 911 call. A Tinley Park officer happened to be responding to a call at another store in the center, and so he was the first one on scene at 10:46 a.m. Despite the quick response time, the gunman was already gone. The shopping center was locked down while police searched for the shooter, and a helicopter flew over the area to assist with locating him. But there was no sign of him, and the center was reopened. When police entered the back room of Lane Bryant, they saw 6 women laying on the ground with gunshot wounds to the heads. Miraculously, one of the women was still alive. At the moment the trigger was pulled, she turned her head and the bullet had grazed her neck. She laid perfectly still until police arrived, playing dead so the killer wouldn't shoot her again. The surviving woman's name has never been released. Obviously, it's been done for her protection. In fact, it wasn't until days after the shooting that the police confirmed there even was a survivor. They didn't want the killer finding out that she had escaped death. She had seen his face and was the only living witness. So police were worried she would be targeted.
Police did release the names of the other 5 women. Before we continue with the details of the investigation, it's important we honor them and their memory.
Rhoda McFarlane was the 42-year-old store manager. She wasn't rostered to work on the second, but she often did extra shifts to help out. And on this specific occasion, she knew the clearance sale that they were having would bring extra people in, and she wanted to ease the workload. That was the type of manager she had been for the 2 years she held the position, caring and thoughtful. Prior to working at Lane Bryant, Rhoda worked at Embassy Christian Church in Crest Hill. She started as an administrative assistant before becoming an ordained minister and then a youth pastor. She ran a mentoring program for young girls called Princess Unveiled, where she helped girls to feel special. The church closed, and we're going to put a pin in that because we're coming back. And Rhoda went to work at Lane Bryant, where she was well-liked. And if we back up even further into Rhoda's life, before working at the church, she was a nurse in the U.S. Air Force, and she was stationed at Andrews Air Force Base. Rhoda was also engaged to be married. She liked to write and cook in her spare time. Rhoda's brother Maurice describes his sister to A&E as having a glowing personality and a great laugh. Her friend Anthony told the Herald News that Rhoda was a giving person in every manner of the word. Another friend, Steve, made the following tribute telling Patch, if she could help anybody, she was in the area. She was like a magnet. She drew people to her. If you were sad, down and out, she would make you smile and feel good about living. There is not one bad thing you could say about Rhoda. She gave her all. She was full of life and full of love. Connie Woolfolk was in the store that day because she had plans to go out that night with friends for a birthday party. She was a single mom to 2 boys, ages 6 and 10, and they were her whole world. She was close with her mom, too. In fact, the pair owned a business together called Mortgages Etc., where Connie worked as a mortgage lender. She was also close to her siblings who adored her. Her brother told ABC 7 Chicago that Connie was a beautiful person. No matter who you were, you loved her. And her sister said at her celebration of life that Connie was always special, that she had a way of showing love, pure love. Her other brother, Aaron, told the Sun-Times that his sister had suffered at the hands of the gunman before the fatal shot was fired. the autopsy revealed that she had blood under her nails and scratches on her body. There was also evidence that she had been pistol whipped and had other evidence of a physical attack. It is important to note that it isn't clear if Connie was the only victim that was beaten before her death, or if the other women were and their families chose not to disclose that information to the media. As for Jennifer Bishop, she was in town with her husband, who was attending a roofing conference. She had 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter, who ranged in age from 7 years old to just 6 months. Family time was important to Jennifer, and she was so involved with her kids' school and athletic activities. She lived in South Bend, Indiana, where she worked as an ICU nurse. And Jennifer was amazing at her job. She was well liked by patients and doctors alike. She had worked at the same hospital called South Bend Memorial since 1995, the year before she graduated with her nursing degree. Jennifer had also recently been promoted to charge nurse. Carrie Hudick Chuso was 33 years old. In 2006, she married her husband, Tony Chuso, and the couple were talking about starting a family. Carrie's sister-in-law, Jennifer, said, Carrie was the most wonderful, loving person who did everything for anybody. Carrie worked as a counselor at Homewood Flossmoor High School, a position that she held for 4 years. And in those 4 years, Carrie sponsored more than a dozen student support groups, helping students with everything from anger management to coping with family members in the military. The Homewood Flossmoor School District spokesman, David Thiemann, said that Carrie was very well respected by her colleagues and adored by her students. Carrie was in Lane Bryant that day because she had a get-together with some college friends coming up, and she wanted to get something new for the occasion. Sarah T. Safransky was the youngest victim of the massacre at just 22 years old. She graduated from Oak Forest High School, where she was very involved. She played clarinet in the concert band, was a member of the badminton team, and was in multiple groups including Mathletes and the Spanish Club. More recently, Sarah had graduated from Northern Illinois University. And that day she was shopping at Lane Bryant for new clothes to wear to a job that she had just gotten. She was supposed to be working in the accounting department at CNA Financial in Chicago. She had worked hard in school and got good grades, and she was so excited for this next chapter in her life. A former classmate named Shannon told the Southtown Star that Sarah was such a nice person. Everybody really kind gravitated to her. Little is known about the unknown survivor, which again is for her protection. But from the little information that was released, we know that she was 33 years old and she was in nursing school. She worked 2 jobs as she studied, with Lane Bryant being her weekend job.
Investigators began trying to find the man responsible for this horrific crime. They released very little information to the media and to this day remain very tight-lipped about the case.
3 days after the shooting on February 5th, Tinley Park Police Chief Mike O'Connell said that the investigation had been extremely sensitive and that police needed to keep this information confidential. They did, however, confirm that day that there was one survivor, in addition to announcing a $55,000 reward, most of which was offered by Lane Bryant's parent company, Charming Shops, Inc. Having a survivor meant that there was a witness who held key information about what exactly happened in the store. Police were understandably concerned about overwhelming the survivor, so they interviewed her in stages. And one of the first things the survivor was asked to do was describe the gunman. Her description changed slightly multiple times over the course of the first week, which is to be expected. She had been through such a massive trauma, and her brain was processing the information the best that it could. Initially, the suspect was described as being a black male, 5'8" to 5'10", 230 to 260 pounds, 25 to 35 years old, with a medium complexion, broad shoulders, and clean shaven. He was wearing black jeans, with writing or embroidery made of rhinestones in the back pockets, a dark-colored jacket that was waist-length, and a charcoal gray knit cap with hair pulled back with thick, braided hair and a receding hairline. One braid was said to be lying over the right side of his face at a cheek level, with 4 light green beads at the end of the braid. But as I said, over the course of the investigation, the description changed slightly, and the final description reads as follows. A husky, medium, dark-complected black man with broad shoulders, between 25 and 35 years old, about 6 feet to 6'2", and weighing between 230 and 260 pounds. He was wearing a waist-length dark-colored winter coat, a charcoal gray knit cap, and black jeans with rhinestones similar to a cursive G on the back pockets. The suspect had a receding hairline and 3 to 5, quote, puffy cornrows. One braid was lying on the right side of his face at cheek level. There were 4 light green beads at the end of the braid. As with a lot of true crime cases, there has been some misinformation. For example, some news reports stated that the gunman was wearing a red coat. However, that's not correct. Then, on February 11th, police released a sketch of the suspect. They didn't want to rush the survivor, who was obviously traumatized, and they wanted the sketch to be as accurate as possible before they released it. And within 24 hours of the sketch being released, there were 24 new leads. Police were interested in following up with local hair salons to see if they recognized the suspect and remembered doing his hair. Unfortunately, this avenue was unsuccessful. And according to Unresolved, the surviving victim led police to a discarded coffee cup the gunman had been carrying. While the cup hasn't been confirmed by law enforcement, it's believed investigators were able to get a DNA sample through the coffee cup, as well as the DNA under Connie's fingernails. The police theorized that the shooting was a robbery gone wrong, and they revealed that $200 cash was missing from the store. The gunman had also taken an unknown amount from the victims' purses, and he stole unspecified valuables from them too.
It's important to note that even the police thought it was odd that someone would rob a clothing store where most payments were electronic so early in the morning and then stay for an extended period of time. The police's explanation for this was that the gunman must have been desperate for any amount of cash and figured that a woman's clothing store would likely be staffed with women who were, quote, more likely to be compliant and hand over whatever cash is on hand.
Investigators combed the Lane Bryant store for evidence. They found a very large quantity, and that's in quotes, including bullet casings from the firearm, though they didn't find the gun because the killer took the gun with him. They canvassed the shopping center, looking for people who were in the area the day of the shooting and who might have seen something, anything, and could be able to provide more information. They also handed out flyers that they hoped would jog someone's memory. Then, on February 6th, the surviving victim released a statement. By this time, she had been released from the hospital and placed into protective custody. Her parents who lived in custody were advised to leave home for a few weeks for their safety. The survivor's statement said, "On Saturday, February 2nd, an unspeakable tragedy occurred and 5 of the bravest women I have ever met were senselessly murdered and taken from their families. My deepest sympathies and condolences go out to their families and friends. Please know that during the unfathomable events of that day, their thoughts were focused on you and coming home. My heart aches that they were unable to do so, and I'm working with the authorities in any way possible for all the victims. I ask that the media please respect all of our families and allow us to grieve and cope privately with the horrific crime that ripped our worlds apart. I also ask that everyone respect that neither I nor my family can discuss the horrible events that day. I thank everybody who has expressed concern and ask that any person who can assist in the investigation contact the authorities immediately." And by February 7th, there were more than 50 detectives assigned to the case, logging over 2,000 investigative hours since the shooting. The same day, the Sun-Times published an article about the killer after working up a profile with the help of 2 former FBI profilers, Greg McCrary and Clint Van Zandt. And if either of those names sound familiar to you, that's probably because Van Zandt had led the team that identified the Unabomber. Now, according to the profilers and this article, it was likely that the killer had been to jail before, because the robbery and shooting wasn't an entry-level crime, and that's in quotes. The profilers said that the people who commit these types of crimes usually have a long criminal history and a history of violence. On top of that, the speed with which he executed the victims and fled also suggests that he had experience. However, they do acknowledge that it's impossible to know for sure. The article continued saying that the gunman may have killed the women because he didn't want to risk being sent back to prison. They go on to say that he may not have intended to kill the women when he entered the store. However, things escalated when he felt he was losing control of the situation. The profilers thought that the killer either knew one of the victims or lived in the area, saying, either way, something went wrong that caused him to take 6 women down. Maybe one of the women recognized him, or he felt he'd been recognized. They said, a robbery seems odd in this case. Did he go through the victim's bags for cash and credit cards as well, or did he just take cash from the register? The following day, the Sun-Times ran another article, reporting that the killer had heard Rhoda talking to the 911 dispatcher. He then got mad and shot her before shooting the other 5 women. The publication also said the intent of the killer was to keep robbing people as they came into the store. However, it's important for me to point out to our listeners that it's unclear how they knew this. Had they gotten this information from the police, from the survivor, or were they just speculating? We don't know. After collecting evidence in the store, investigators focused on the surrounding area. It's likely that the evidence they were looking for was the gun. On February 9th, dive teams braved the freezing ponds and streams in the area. Grid searches were conducted along the roads and interstates. Trash cans in the shopping center were scoured. And despite this mammoth effort, no further evidence was found.
9 days later, a portion of Rhoda's 911 call was released to the media.
Police were hitting roadblocks when it came to interviewing members of the Black community during the investigation, and this was due to a lack of trust between the two parties. So the police approached Black pastors in the area in order to help forge relationships and make connections. While the store itself didn't have cameras, investigators were able to pull footage from stores and businesses within 1.5 miles of Lane Bryant. And on March 15th, police released images taken from the surveillance camera outside the nearby Target. These images, which were super grainy, showed a dark-colored SUV and a small sedan parked outside Lane Bryant. The footage showed police that the vehicles pulled in at 10:39 and 10:40, respectively, and left at 10:46. Investigators were unsure if the vehicles were involved or potential witnesses, and they wanted to speak to the drivers. Eventually, the images were enhanced by a NASA scientist, but no amount of enhancing could make the license plates readable. Releasing the images coincided with the case being featured on America's Most Wanted that same day. It was hoped that the extra coverage and attention would bring in more leads and hopefully some answers. And while it brought in more tips, it didn't bring in more answers. To this day, the drivers of the vehicles remain unknown. By April 4th, it was announced that the reward had been increased to $100,000. Police had received 2,300 tips in the 2 months since the shooting, but they wanted to hear from more people who might have information. The following month, the police announced that they had run the fingerprints and DNA found at the scene, but it didn't match anyone in the database. They even sent the front doors from the store to the lab in the hopes of getting some evidence off them, but it was all in vain. In June, a 3D sketch of the killer was released. It was more lifelike, and the hope was that it would be more recognizable. During the course of the investigation, police looked into the backgrounds of all of the victims, just in case it wasn't a random attack and one of them had been targeted. That's when questions arose about Rhoda's former employer, Embassy Christian Center in Crest Hill. And police decided to look into the church, its leader, and its members more closely. George Aja Jr. was the former pastor and owner of the church, and Rhoda was his administrative assistant before she was ordained. In March 2005, George took out an $860,000 mortgage against the church without telling anyone. 5 months after that, George moved to Austin, Texas, to open a new branch, leaving Rhoda behind to run the Crest Hill location. Some members followed George to Austin, but many stayed. Those who stayed soon found out that the church, which they thought was nearly paid off, owed nearly $1 million to the bank. And after this discovery, hundreds of members left the church and joined other congregations. Rhoda tried to hold down the fort, but she also left in November of 2006. The decision to leave was a difficult one for Rhoda, and it was made even harder by the fact that George, the man she considered her spiritual mentor, stopped talking to her after she left. On top of all of that, police also discovered that a former church member's cell phone pinged off the tower closest to Lane Bryant an hour before the murders.
In August, detectives went to Austin to investigate if Rhoda's connection to the church was at all related to the murders. Unfortunately, Nothing came of this theory, although it remains the biggest theories detectives had.
By 2012, the 50-person task force had dwindled down to 3 full-time investigators and an analyst from the Illinois State Police. The investigation had cost nearly $1.5 million. That's not including help conducted by the FBI, state police, Secret Service, and the South Suburban Major Crime Task Force. Police were desperate for new information, but there wasn't any. They kept going back over the evidence that they had, trying to see if they had missed anything. They analyzed the cell phone records of the 2 towers in the area, but that was a dead end too. Police even went to London to meet with a doctor who had developed a breakthrough way to extract fingerprints. Police never released information about what they discovered on this trip. However, they did hint that they made discoveries. In 2013, Commander Patrick McCain said, "If I were to make a best guess, it was probably a robbery that failed. However, every time we focus on one thing, there's something in there that just doesn't fit right." With no new leads, no new evidence, and no new witnesses, the case grew cold. Then, on the 10-year anniversary, the case was in the media again. Police released an updated 3D sketch of the suspect, which brought in 100 new tips. Adding those 100, the total tips received over the decade of investigation was 7,300. They managed to isolate the killer's voice in the 911 recording, but they still couldn't make out exactly what he was saying. Police believed that they were just missing that one piece of information that would tie the case together. And if they could find that key information, the case could be solved. The police assured the public that they were still committed to finding the killer and bringing him to justice. The police chief has echoed that sentiment to the public, telling A&E everyone wanted it solved. It was a horrific crime that really changed the community. Every time you got one step forward, you go 2 steps back. There was no clear motive and a lot of leads. Tinley Park investigators even traveled to Philadelphia to meet with a group of current and retired law enforcement agents, forensic experts, and psychologists. They believed that fresh eyes and eyes with a lot of experience certainly couldn't hurt. But it turns out it didn't help much either. The last update we have in the case is from February 2021, the 13th anniversary of the murders. Police would only say that the case was still active, and they declined to say if there were any suspects. It doesn't seem that there's any evidence linking the gunmen to any of the victims, which suggests that it was a random attack. And the number of officers assigned to the case has dropped to 1, Ray Violetto. After the murders, Lane Bryant closed the store permanently, and the building was vacant until 2013. A TJ Maxx now occupies the space. If you have any information that could help investigators, there is a dedicated tip line for the investigation. That number is 708-444-5394, as well as an email address, lanebryant.tipline@tinleypark.org. There's a $100,000 reward.
Make sure to follow us on all of our socials at The Murder Diaries Pod. And until then,
Stay safe.
bye.
Seeking the truth never gets old. Introducing June's Journey, the free-to-play mobile game that will immerse you in a thrilling murder mystery. Join June Parker as she uncovers hidden objects and clues to solve her sister's death in a beautifully illustrated world set in the Roaring '20s. With new chapters added every week, the excitement never ends. Download June's Journey now on your Android or iOS device, or play on PC through Facebook Games.